Hello, my name is Elizabeth, and I am 41 years old. I used to be very thoughtful when I sat in the living room with the light shining through the curtains and creating lengthy shadows. Elizabeth, sweetheart, you're imagining once more. My mother's voice interrupted my trance. With her hands on her hips and donning her go-to flowery apron, she stood in the doorway. I'm just thinking, Mom, I forced a grin to say in response. There was a feeling of happiness and simplicity in our tiny, pleasant middle-class house. However, I was beginning to feel more alone and cut off from my parents' regular routines on the inside. With a newspaper in his hand, my father entered. He sat down next to me and said, "What's on your mind, Lissy?" After a moment of hesitation, I answered, "It's just school. I feel so out of place there." I had never been with anybody except myself, and was often the outsider at school due to my introversion. With a softened face, my mother sat down opposite me. "You're just different, Elizabeth. You're special, and that's a good thing." "Yeah, Mom," I said, chuckling a little. "I guess I'm not like the other kids." My dad gave me a loving comb-over. With a mixture of pride and worry in his eyes, he reassured me, "Lizzie, being different is a strength. You'll find your way." As the sun sank and long shadows were thrown on the walls, I sat by myself in my room and thought back to my lonely school days. Because of my background and the makeup of my family, I had always felt alone, and the low murmur of the evening just made it more apparent. I had no idea that my life would take an unexpected turn the very next day that would shake up the monotony of my days. I still recall the day I began to take James and Edward seriously. It was one of those normal Tuesday afternoons when the light would slowly trickle through the classroom windows and leave lengthy shadows on our desks. I was listening intently to Mr. Thompson's Shakespeare lesson, but it was almost hard to focus with James and Edward's incessant murmuring behind me. James whispered, not so softly, "Psst, Eddie, what's the answer to number 5? I heard. Edward's voice faltered as Mr. Thompson's steely stare swept across the room. "Shh, I think it's, My patience finally becoming thin, I turned around. "I apologize for sounding harsh, but could you two please be quiet? Some of us are trying to learn something here." James just shrugged, flashing his signature smile. "Sorry, Beth. We're just trying to get through this too, you know?" Edward nodded, seeming a little more contrite. "Yeah, sorry, Beth. We'll keep it down." However, their 5-minute keeping it down was all that it was. With a sigh, I accepted that I would be distracted for another afternoon. When the bell did eventually ring, I hurriedly grabbed my books and was ready to go. James cried out, "Hey, Beth, wait up!" as I got to my feet. I stopped and partially turned to face them. "What is it?" "We would like to inquire if you could assist us with our English," Edward said, rubbing the back of his skull. "You always seem to know what's going on." I arched an eyebrow. "And why would I do that?" James grinned, a playful twinkle in his eyes. "Because you're the smartest person we know, and we're, well, not." I couldn't resist chuckling a little. "All right, I'll help you. But only if you promise to actually study and not just goof around." They all said, "We promise," perhaps too cheerfully. After my initial English class meeting with James and Edward, I had a string of loud, disruptive classes that tried my patience. But despite my best efforts to keep my distance from their shenanigans, I couldn't help but get engrossed in their jovial banter and innocent practical jokes. Compared to my comfort zone of seclusion, this was rather different. I quickly reached a turning point as a result of my unintentional fascination. One day, I found myself in the seldom-used hallways connecting school buildings. I spotted them again, hidden away in my hiding place for a smoke break. With a sly smile on his lips, James said, "Hey, Beth, fancy meeting you here." I attempted to hide a grin as I rolled my eyes. "Shouldn't you two be in class?" Edward shrugged and looked at me for a moment before averting his eyes. "Could say the same about you. Smoking during school hours. Tisk, tisk." I tried to look indifferent as I took another drag. "What's your excuse, then?" "We're on an important mission," James said with a dramatic wink. Edward shook his head and gave him an elbow. "We're just skipping Mr. Benson's history lecture. You know how it is. In spite of me, I laughed. Yeah, I can't stand his lectures either, but don't you guys ever get tired of getting into trouble? James leaned back against the wall, mischievous sparkles in his eyes. Trouble? Us? We're just misunderstood, right, Edward? With a little grin pulling at his lips, Edward nodded. Yeah, misunderstood. I let out a sigh and threw the cigarette in a neighboring trash can. Well, misunderstood or not, you two are going to end up in serious trouble one of these days? James seemed completely at ease as he extended his arms behind his head. And we'll handle it when it comes. Life's too short to worry about every little rule, Beth. Although Edward nodded in agreement, there was a tinge of concern in his gaze. Still, we should try not to push our luck too far. That day, I realized that I was really smiling for the first time because of their contagious, carefree attitude. Just try not to drag me into your misunderstandings, okay? James let out a hearty chuckle that filled the room. No promises, Beth. But hey, if we do, it'll be the most fun you've had in ages. The smoky hallways connecting the school buildings turned into a haven for me in the days that followed, shielding me from my own inner anguish as well as the probing eyes of the instructors. I would frequently catch glances of James and Edward while I had the sinful pleasure of smoking. Their lively banter and laughing stood in sharp contrast to my alone times. The occurrence that would turn our casual acquaintance into something more profound and significant happened during one of these alone pauses. Greetings for the afternoon. I'm Elizabeth, and when I think back on those early years, one day in particular comes to mind, the day that made James and Edward seem like family. When I was sitting in class, listening intently to the teacher's speech, all of a sudden there was a huge crash that reverberated throughout the room. Startled, I spun around to find a shattered window and James and Edward standing there, still looking just as guilty as ever. With a hint of exasperation in her voice, the instructor said, "Elizabeth, can you believe this? Do you see what your classmates have done?" I looked at Edward and James. James's eyes gleamed with mischief, and Edward seemed a little ashamed. "Miss, it was an accident," James grinned. "We were just trying to pass a note, and it, got out of hand." The instructor, obviously not believing his story, shot out, "A note that breaks windows, Mr. James? Really?" I had no choice but to speak out. "Maybe it would be best if they just helped clean up and apologized, miss," I said, startling even myself. Edward gave me a grateful expression in his eyes. With a mutter, "Thank you, Elizabeth. We didn't mean any harm." James, however, seemed to find my intervention humorous. He laughed. "Look at Elizabeth, always the peacemaker. We owe you one." As the lesson went on, the instructor assigned James and Edward the responsibility of tidying up the mess, and I was requested to help them in a supervisory role. I reluctantly gave in. Edward muttered to us as we picked up the glass fragments, "You didn't have to do that, help us, I mean." I gave a shrug. "I know, but it seemed like the right thing to do. Besides, it's not like you guys are bad people. You just make poor decisions sometimes." James laughed when he heard what we were talking about. "Poor decisions," she says. "Edward, I think she has us figured out." When Edward grinned at me, I had an odd feeling of one with them. Despite being an unusual three, a kinship was developing between us under the commotion. The remainder of the cleaning proceeded with jovial conversation. That's when I understood James and Edward were just average people looking for a little excitement in their lives underneath their problematic exteriors. And maybe, just perhaps, I was beginning to like their company more than I would have liked to admit. I was navigating a new world with James and Edward as the gates of college life opened. Our carefree high school days had given way to something more serious, yet our relationship was still very strong. "It's unbelievable that we all attended the same college," I said out loud on a cool fall day. We were relaxing on the university green, which is where we usually congregate in between courses. James smiled as he lay on his back with his hands under his head. "Fate, Elizabeth. It's fate." Or maybe Edward secretly manipulated our applications. Seated cross-legged, Edward laughed. As much as I'd love to take credit, I think it's just our luck. Or maybe our misfortune, considering I still have to put up with James. I chuckled, enjoying the comforting sensation of company. Emotions and experiences had a way of amplifying at college, and I was happy to have them on my side. Edward inquired, looking directly into my brown eyes. So, Elizabeth, any thoughts on what you're majoring in? With real curiosity, I said, experiencing a twinge of enthusiasm at the idea. I'm leaning towards English literature. There's something about diving into different worlds through words. James suddenly stood up and gestured aggressively at me. You, a literature nerd? I should have guessed. You always had your nose in a book. Edward gave him a gentle prod. And what about you, James? Planning to major in mischief? James responded with a rare seriousness. Very funny. Actually, I'm thinking about sports science. Volleyball's been calling my name. That's fantastic, James. I always knew you'd pursue a career in sports, I urged, admiring his drive. Edward gave a nod of approval. Yeah, you'll excel in that, no doubt. This was how our chats often went, ranging from goals and ambitions to the odd, light-hearted jab. Over these years, my friendship with Edward became closer. Our light-hearted conversations evolved into lengthy, thought-provoking exchanges, and I was captivated to his kind disposition and perceptive thinking. Elizabeth was studying in the library one evening when Edward said in a whisper, "Elizabeth, can I talk to you about something?" Curious, I nodded. "Of course, Edward. What's on your mind?" His fingers thumping on the table, he paused. "I've been thinking a lot lately about us." A beat skipped in my heart. Us? With his eyes seeking mine for an answer, he said, "Yes, I feel like there's something more between us, more than just friendship. I've felt this way for a while." I was shocked and felt a mixture of happiness and astonishment when I said, "Edward, I think I feel the same." Gently, he extended his hand and grasped mine. Really? I was so worried I'd ruin our friendship. "I don't think that's possible," I murmured, holding his hand tightly. "Our friendship is too strong. It's the foundation of, well, whatever this is." With a look of relief spreading over his face, Edward grinned. "I'm glad to hear that. I want to see where this goes, Elizabeth, if you're willing." "I am," I said, sensing the start of a new chapter in our life. I had developed a close and enduring connection with James and Edward throughout my bright and demanding time in college. Together, we had successes and setbacks and develop it in ways I could never have predicted. I noticed a subtle shift in my connection with Edward through these years. The more time we shared, the more I understood how deeply I felt for him. It was something deeper, a connection that spoke to my own soul. It was no longer merely company or laughs. Edward and I started a new chapter together as the last page of our college careers flipped, bringing with it a painful goodbye to regularity, and our hearts entwined in love and optimism. From being a fragile seed in the garden of our friendship, our connection grew into a stunning, enduring companionship. The clarity and brightness of our wedding day's sunrise perfectly captured the joy that flooded my heart. The garden was a riot of color, providing a lovely backdrop for our vows. As I made my way down the aisle, Edward, looking sharp in his suit, gave me a nervous but thrilled grin. He muttered, "You look stunning, Beth," and I joined him, our hands intertwined. I was beaming. "And you look quite handsome yourself, Mr. Future Husband." The vows we exchanged during the wedding reflected our unwavering love and dedication, creating a frenzy of emotions. But the speech James gave at the reception summed up our trip perfectly. James lifted his drink and smiled at us. "To Elizabeth and Edward, may your life be filled with as much adventure and love as you've brought into mine. Edward, take care of her, or you'll answer to me." We all laughed together, the noise blending into the happy toast of glasses clinking. A few years into our marriage, we were excited and a little nervously delighted to learn that we would soon become parents. Edward entered the room one evening as I was setting up the nursery. He had a contemplative look on his face. "Are you considering becoming a father?" I said, placing a plush animal on the shelf. As he joined me near the crib, he nodded. I just want to be the best dad. I want our child to have everything we didn't. I grasped his hand and gave it a little squeeze. You'll be a wonderful father. We'll figure it out together, just like we always do. The world appeared to disappear a few months later as we were cuddling our newborn son Alex in the hospital room. Edward looked at our kid and said, "He's perfect, Beth," his eyes sparkling with tears that had not yet fallen. Grinning, I glanced from Edward to Alex. He really is our little family. James eventually moved through the door, his customary bluster dampened by the spectacle. He had been loitering at it. "Hey, little guy, welcome to the world. Your Uncle James is going to teach you all the fun stuff," he remarked with a wink. Edward laughed. "Over my dead body." Our laughing echoed throughout the space, and I hoped that this would become a regular part of Alex's life, a life that was just getting started in a world full of love and limitless opportunities. After years of irregular beats, life with Edward was like slipping into a peaceful, steady pace. Alex, our kid, was a lovely combination of Edward's perceptive gaze and my modest smile. James was a constant in our life. His vivacity and excitement stood in stark contrast to our quieter home. The soft aroma of jasmine from the garden permeated the air as we sat in our living room one evening. I was crocheting Alex a scarf while Edward read a book. With a brightness that was familiar, the door opened. "Hey, everyone, the world's most gorgeous family. How are they faring?" James strolled in with his customary panache, carrying a bag of Edward's bakery goodies. Grinning, Edward raised his gaze. "James, you are aware that you are not need to bring pastries each time. Here, we have an abundance." "Ah, but the maestro himself created them most recently. Remember that I'm your taste tester?" James set the bag down on the table and grinned. I chuckled. "Well, thank you for serving as a taste tester. Do you want tea?" "That's fantastic, Beth. Regards." James took a seat on the couch and looked at a sketch that Alex had completed. "Does Alex create this? The child is talented." With pride visible in his eyes, Edward nodded. "He does, for sure. Has his mother's traits." Alex sprang into the room as I put down the tea tray, his face beaming with excitement at seeing James. "Aunt James." "Hey, champion." James tossed Alex's hair about. "How is your education going?" "Well done. We are studying the planets. 79 moons orbit Jupiter. Did you know that?" Alex's enthusiasm was contagious. "That's a lot of moons, wow. What say you? Should we arrange a vacation there?" James obliged, causing Alex to chuckle. I gave James his tea. "How are things doing for you in the volleyball world?" His expression brightened as he took a drink. "Excellent, excellent. Next week is an important match for us. You all need to attend to see." Edward closed his book and thought about it. "It seems like a very good concept. Alex, what say you?" "Indeed. Let me watch Uncle James perform." Alex excitedly clapped his hands. James gave us a glance as his eyes softened. "You people are the greatest, you know that. I really appreciate each and every one of you, and I don't express it enough." Edward extended his arm to give James a shoulder pat. "James, we are a family, always there to support one another." It was a quiet, chilly Thursday when we received the news, and Edward summoned me into our living room. His look was inscrutable, which was a sharp contrast to the warmth that usually glowed in his brown eyes. I was thankful for our kid Alex's modest favor of being at school, as he didn't need to witness this just yet. Edward said, his voice hardly audible above a whisper. "Liz, today I visited the doctor. They discovered something." My spine tingled as I wondered, "Edward, what did they find?" His hands were a little shaky as he inhaled deeply. "Liz, it's cancer. It is sophisticated." The world seemed to come to a standstill. I was stunned and couldn't even absorb what he said. However, "You never seem to get sick. How is it possible?" Unshed tears were overflowing from Edward's eyes. "Liz, I have no idea. Simply said, I'm not sure." We simply sat there in quiet for a long time, his comments weighing hard on both of us. I extended my hand and grasped his, attempting to provide solace and a modicum of normality amongst our collapsing world. James stopped by later that night. Since he had always been a member of our family, the idea of going through this without him was intolerable. "Hey, how are things doing for you?" James inquired as he entered, the seriousness of the issue casting a shadow over his often upbeat demeanor. Edward produced a false grin. "Yes, you are familiar with me, as resilient as ever." James took a seat next to him, his expression solemn. "I take it you're going to fight this? Are you not simply going to give up?" Edward gave a nod. "I'm going to fight. For Alex, for Liz, for us." We spoke, laughed, and made some rough plans for the future throughout the evening. Beneath it all, however, was a worry that none of us wanted to face, a feeling of approaching loss. Weeks passed before Edward started his therapy. The colorful, vivacious guy I'd married began to wane gradually. He was often in agony and left weary from the rigorous treatment. Even though I made an effort to be strong for him and Alex, there were times when I would weep myself to sleep in silence, lamenting the life we were losing. I sat next to Edward and held his hand one evening as he slept on the sofa. Upstairs, Alex was most likely engrossed in his video game universe, a momentary haven from the brutal reality below. Edward said, "Liz," in a faint but determined voice. "If anything were to happen to me," I interjected, not wanting to hear such words. "Don't talk like that." However, Edward went on, "Liz, please, make me a promise that you will live. For you, Alex, I promise you'll experience bliss once again." I couldn't talk as I nodded, tears running down my cheeks. I bent down and gave him a little forehead kiss. "Edward, I swear to you. However, you're not leaving. You will not put up with this." With a feeble grin, Edward gradually closed his eyes. "Liz, I'll fight. I'll put up the best fight I can." I spoke to the darkness as I laid in bed that night. "Edward, you have to fight. I was looking at the sailing. You are needed by use." However, I had a gut feeling that things would only become worse on our voyage. Furthermore, I wasn't sure how much further we could go. Edward was gone the next day. The day of the burial was cloudy, reflecting the gloomy atmosphere that pervaded us. I stood beside Alex, holding his hand firmly as others flocked around to give their sympathies. There was a palpable sense of loss in the air, with whispers and the odd sniffle filling the air. James stepped forward, red-rimmed yet unwavering in his gaze. With a sorrowful grin pulling at the edges of his lips, he said, "He would have hated all this fuss." I nodded while stifling my emotions. "But he deserved to be remembered, James. He touched so many lives." With his voice hardly audible above a whisper, Alex looked up at us and whispered, "Dad was the best. I wish he was still here." "He's still with us, Alex." "In here," I whispered, putting my palm over his heart, while I tightened my grip on his hand. James squatted down next to Alex. "Your dad was the bravest man I knew, and he's left us with a lot of good memories, right? We'll keep talking about him, keep his spirit alive." The truth of Edward's absence became more apparent as the ceremony went on. The eulogies depicted a guy who was really loved and had a life well lived. I listened, my pulse pounding with every word and every recollected moment. Anna, Edward's sister, came up to use after the funeral. Her remarks seemed prepared, her voice icy. "Elizabeth, we need to discuss the will and the estate. There are matters that need settling." A surge of wrath shot through me, but I remained composed. "Now is not the time, Anna. Today is about remembering Edward, not discussing assets." James was there for me, his silence a comfort. "We'll handle everything in due time. Let's just focus on saying goodbye to a great man today." I felt the finality of the moment as the audience started to depart, yet despite the sadness, there was a sense of power and solidarity, a resolve to carry on Edward's legacy in the days ahead. Since the burial, my 14-year-old son Alex had been painting quietly in his room. The boisterous anguish that enveloped me contrasted sharply with his peaceful loss. James, who had practically taken up residence in our house ever since Edward's death, sat idly on the couch and thumbed through a picture book. A timid voice said, "Mom, are they coming today?" When the thick quiet was broken, I turned to find him at the doorway, his youthful forehead furrowed in concern. I said, "Yes, Alex, they are. Getting ready for the inevitable argument with Edward's family." James glanced up, thoughts deep in his dark eyes. "Don't worry, Beth. I'll be here. They won't push us around." The uncomfortable silence was broken by the ringing of the doorbell. I inhaled deeply before moving in the direction of the door. When I opened it, their parents were standing on each side of Edward's sister, Anna. They wore a mixture of barely disguised avarice and faked sadness. "Elizabeth, let's talk about Edward's affairs," a chilly Anna said, as she pushed by me into the living room. James got to his feet, his back straight. "And what affairs would those be, Anna? Mourning hasn't even ended." Anna's gaze swept around the room before focusing on the several artifacts that served as reminders of Edward's existence. "We are his family. We have rights to his belongings, his estate." I became quite angry. "Rights? Were you there when he was sick? When he needed care and love?" The guy who seemed to be their father spoke up and said, "We are here to make sure everything is distributed fairly. We are entitled to our share." Alex, who had remained quiet, broke off. "This is our home. Dad wanted us to be here, happy." Alex felt James's comforting hand rest on her shoulder. Edward made his wishes very clear. He wanted Beth and Alex to be taken care of. "And we're supposed to just take your word for it?" Anna mocked. That's when the discussion took a sudden turn. James, who is normally so blustery, spoke gently, but his comments had weight. The room felt his remarks. Edward was my best friend. He trusted me with his final wishes, and he knew I would protect his family no matter what. The space became quiet. Edward's parents looked at one other nervously. Anna seemed to lose confidence, a little fracture appearing in her facade. Edward's love for us, his family, was unwavering. He made his decisions clear. "This house, our memories, they are not up for debate or division," I answered, maintaining my composure in spite of my internal distress. Anna started to respond, but James interrupted her. "You can try to fight this, but you'll find that everything is legally settled. Edward's will is clear, and his wishes are to be respected." There was a noticeable tension in the space. Anna had a narrow line of lips and chilly eyes. "This isn't over, Elizabeth. We will see what the law has to say about this." I fell back into the couch as they walked out, the door shutting behind them with a finality that reverberated throughout the quiet home. Beside me, Alex placed his little hand on mine. James bowed before us, sincere in his gaze. "Beth, Alex, I promise, I won't let them take anything away from you. Edward wouldn't have wanted that." I took Alex's hand in mine, finding strength in his presence. "Thank you, James. I just wish Edward were here." Once again, the only sound in the room was the slow patter of rain on the glass, serving as a soothing reminder of how persistent sorrow is and how much strength we may find in one another. It was at this desperate and rebellious time that James, always the inventor of outlandish ideas, offered his audacious scheme. Even though his plan was absurd, it provided us with a means of defending our house from Anna's grasp, as well as a chance to at last find some kind of calm and a path ahead. The walls of the living room appeared to reverberate with a quiet that was too dense with memories, as one sat there. James stood across from me, staring out into the horizon with a half smile on his lips, as he probably thought back to an experience he had enjoyed with Edward. I snapped out of quiet. "I can't believe they've gone this far, James. Moving in, claiming everything as if they have any right." James looked directly into my eyes, glimmering with that recognizable hint of mischief. "Well, Beth, you know me. I might have a plan." I arched an eyebrow, curious, yet cautious. "A plan that doesn't involve volleyball or your infamous baking disasters, I hope." With a giggle, He leaned closer, and his voice became a whisper, as if plotting. Ghosts, Beth. We'll make them believe this house is haunted. I chuckled, the sound unfamiliar, but comforting. You're joking. Ghosts. Have faith in me, James smiled. I've got it all figured out. That night, James carried out his plan when Anna and her husband were having dinner with us. My son Alex, appearing appropriately terrified, did a great job playing his role. By the way, you're not bothered by, well, the noises? Said James in a casual manner. Anna's mom gave her a pointed glance. Noises? Speaking up, Alex was the epitome of innocence. Yeah, like things moving on their own in my room. The space became tight. I saw the nervous looks that Anna's parents exchanged with her. And in the kitchen, things just fall off the counters, James said, pausing dramatically. Everyone jumped as a loud crash from the kitchen appeared as if on cue. James was a master at timing, so I had to keep my grin to myself. Anna's family was unable to quickly pack their belongings during the subsequent pandemonium. They vowed never to return as they departed, discussing demonic entities. James turned to face me after they had left, his countenance more serious than I had seen in a while. Beth, there's something else. Before Edward got really sick, he made a decision. He sold the house to me. I looked at him in disbelief. Sold? Why would he do that? To keep you and Alex safe, James replied quietly. He wanted to make sure you'd never lose your home. I've been paying you rent, in a way. The money went into our trips, the bakery, everything we did together. Edward wanted you safe, even if he wasn't here. My eyes began to fill up with tears, not just for Edward's passing, but also for the profundity of his love and wisdom. He thought of everything, didn't he? With misted eyes, James nodded. He did, and now it's my turn to make sure his family is taken care of. I became aware of how much James and Edward had influenced my life at that very time. Our path was a tapestry made of happiness, suffering, and an unwavering connection that stretched from the turmoil of our early years to the depths of our present. I said, "Thank you, James," in a very emotional voice. For everything. He grinned, reflecting Edward's warmth. We're family, Beth. Always have been, always will be.